coming from the Sky Paddle. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ideas on Tap. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes here, so just kind of a 2-minute warning. Grab your drinks, grab some food, and then we'll get this show on the road. Okay, everyone. Welcome to Ideas on Tap. We're going to formally kick off this show here. So just to begin, quick introduction. My name is Nathan Pellett. I am the head of our platform division here, so it's one of our development divisions. I'm not going to get into all the details about what that means. However, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is building products that your users are really going to love. And I think we've lined up a great set of speakers this afternoon that are really going to talk about their process of building products that really solve meaningful problems for users and they love. But before we get to our fantastic speakers, I want to talk a little bit about what is Ideas on Tap and what are we doing here this afternoon. So Vendasta holds this, I don't know what we do, 7 or 8 of these a year. And the whole idea is to bring in brilliant minds from our local community and share with the rest of you. And in the meantime, have some good times. Have some drinks, have some snacks, and share those ideas. And then the other nice thing that we do along the way is we raise some money for some charities. And so we've got a different charity every time we hold this. And I'm going to actually hand it off to Justin, who's going to talk about our charity for this month.
So our charity for this month is the Heart and Stroke Foundation. I'm fortunate enough to be playing for the Crazy Cactus hockey team in the Heart and Stroke tournament here at the beginning of April. And we felt like we should have all the funds go to the Heart and Stroke Foundation for tonight for this event. So don't really have a bunch to talk about for that other than show some stats. I played in the tournament last year as well, and we were lucky enough to take the original starting money from like 130 grand that they raised their first year with we actually had the March event here for Ideas on Tap was to the Heart and Stroke Foundation. We raised like $1,200, so that went towards that $430,000 that you see there. So that's what this event is for, the 50-50 tickets as well as the drink tickets. So first and foremost, thanks for all the people outside of Vendasta for coming, and I'm really happy that this is going to a great cause.
All right, thanks, Justin. So to kick off the event here, we have our very own Graham Holtzlander. Graham is the team lead on our social marketing team, and I think he's going to give you some more detail when he comes up here. But everyone give a hand for Graham Holtzlander.
Great. Hello. Am I good? Cool. Yeah, thank you. Welcome to Ideas on Tap. Like you said, this is one of my favorite events that we do here at Vendasta. Just a good time to get together and hear some great talks. So let's get started. Let's get started. Oh. First presenter issues. Never actually used this thing before, so hey. Cool, so that's me. I'm Graham Holtzlander. Like you said, I'm a team lead and a developer here at Vendasta. I work on the team Ghost in the Shell. You can kind of maybe tell by my name, Ghostlander. And what we work on is a product called social marketing. And so what we call it is that it's your one place to stay social. So you add your Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn accounts, and we let you post all that stuff. We bring in some data about your posts. We do a bunch of different stuff like that. So the question I have for all of you today is how many people have an application that they work with that has people using it? Raise your hands if you have that. Good, okay. I was hoping that question would go over. When was the last time you talked to your users? Let's say, show of hands, a month ago, you talked to a user that used your product. Wow, I figured it'd be better than that. How about a week ago? How about yesterday? All right, that's awesome. I'm going to be talking a bit about how we get user feedback for social marketing. But first, I'm going to start with story time. So I'm going to talk about a particular feature in social marketing that we call interesting content. And, you'll get to come along for the ride with what happens. So this is our composer. So you can imagine we're a social application. We want to let people compose posts, and we want to make it a bit easier for people. So we have this interesting content feature, and you can click on that button, and this is a GIF. I'm not doing anything. But you can see we let you set up some Twitter searches, and you can put in some RSS feeds, and it helps you compose posts. Now, what if I told you that rather than this workflow, we preferred this workflow? And if you can't tell, the interesting content icon is gone. Who do you think, whose mind spring was this particular idea? Does anybody have any guesses? It was this guy with the beard. I don't know who he is, but, it was this guy. And, I hope everybody who's gone to a conference has come back and implemented something that people didn't really want because it was what the conference was about. Maybe that's just me, but so here's my pull request. And so, removing interesting content from Composer. That's great. I've got some graphs. I'm showing the data. It used to be this slow, now it's this fast, and everything's great. But if you read the description, especially for the non-technical people, you read the description and you probably see something that's wrong here. I'll highlight it for you. We aren't even sure people are using this anyway, and it adds extra load to the page. So that, at least, in my brain, this is only in October, but, that raises some questions. Who's we, first of all? How do we know people aren't using this feature? Was it a guess? Do we have actual data that this thing is being ignored? I'll tell you, I didn't have the data, plain and simple. Now the question is, we removed this thing, were people using it? Fair question. You put something out into the ether, or you remove it from the ether, as the case may be, and you see what happens. Yeah. People loved this feature, turns out. Caused a bit of a stir. Some examples in our Slack channel. Hotjar is producing some fantastic feedback. While harsh, I have to agree with the last comment. I tried making posts last night, and I dearly missed the interesting content in the composer. This is our chief strategy officer. Probably important to keep her happy. I'll come back to what Hotjar is, and I'll tie that back in. Here's Brendan King, our CEO. Kind of a big deal, I guess. I used it all the time. It's a key component of the sales story we sell. We need to get the team aligned on the story, and that's a key. If you have people selling your product like we do, knowing that story and having that alignment is killer. And this is definitely something that I learned through this whole thing. So the next thing, I'm going to play a video. So Jason, if you're ready for that, but I'll set it up first. This is something that we do every Friday afternoon. It's called Sprint Bazaar, and we show off our new features that we've just written over the past week or 2 weeks. And I was giving a demo on something completely unrelated, and this video is from October 20th, so I released that pull request on October 4th. So it was in the ether for 2 weeks. I'm going to use that word a lot, ether. It was out there for 2 weeks, and somebody had a comment about it. So Jason, maybe just let me know when you're ready, and I'll go for it. Should be audio. Oh. I'll start it again whenever you're ready there. All right, cool. Ready? Sorry, I want to see the whole thing, so just give me the thumbs up, Jason. Oh, there we go. I can hear it. Yeah, just jack it up and it'll be good. So yeah, that was something that we, I guess, foolishly decided that we could remove because people weren't using it. We thought. Turns out a lot of people like that feature, so that's like next sprint we're gonna probably add that back in. And the reason we took it out was because it was adding to our page load times, just because of how we had things set up. We're gonna add it back. We're gonna make sure it doesn't have those issues, and then we'll get it back for you guys.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, am I back? Seems a lot louder now. So yeah, that, I don't know if you've been in that situation before where you made a judgment call that was like 100% wrong and somebody calls you on it. But I mean, it was uncomfortable. It was a growth opportunity for me, absolutely. And big shout out to Megan, who's over there. Always gives the best feedback at Bazaars. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so it was a fun week and a bit for me, for sure. But the story does have a happy ending. We got interesting content back into the composer, and everything was good. So that was October 4th, was that first one, and November 3rd, we brought it back, and we were able to fix the issues that I had with it that sort of made my conference brain, go backwards. And we were able to bring it back, so that's good. So that brings me to feedback in social marketing. How do we actually get it? We have a few ways. One of them is this Friday demo time that we call Sprint Bazaar. So we don't have actual users at this Sprint Bazaar, or not regularly. But these are like interested parties, and they're like surrogates for users. They're people who deal with our users, in my case, pretty often. And they know our pain points, and they know, the things that make our users happy about our products. And when we demo something that makes one of those things worse or better, they're the people who really have a better understanding than I do of what'll change that for the users. We also get a lot of feedback in person. So Megan, again, talks to me in person all the time. After I give a demo, very often people come up to me afterward and ask another question or say, hey, I have somebody who tries to do this and they can't. Do you want to think about that? We also have Slack. We have a social marketing channel on our Slack workspace here at Vendasta. Anybody can drop in there anytime and leave us some feedback. And finally, we use something called Hotjar, and this is going to be the main piece of my presentation today is some of the features we love about Hotjar and why I think you, as a person developing an application, should use Hotjar. So this is hotjar.com. They say they're the all-in-one analytics and feedback. I think that's true. We use both of those things, analytics and feedback. Here's one of the features. This one's called heat maps. So you can see, and I mean, if you've ever seen a heat map before, it's very similar. This one's tracking clicks. Clicks. Wow. So if you look at the top left, you see sort of a mildly hot spot. That's our scheduled posts part of our navigation. So a lot of people coming in into social marketing and they want to look at their scheduled posts, make sure they have a handle on what's going on. But by far our hottest part of our product is at the bottom right there. It sort of looks like a cross section of a jawbreaker or something. And that's our compose button. That's sort of what it looks like normally, but in the heat map, it's by far the most used piece. And so how you would use this feedback is we have this thing that people click all the time. Don't move it. Don't change what it looks like. Don't, move it without at least some consultation of, how people use your product. Because probably you're going to get some stuff in one of the next features I'm going to show you complaining about it. So this is the next one. This is sort of a beautiful mind looking picture, but what we have is called recordings. So this is a recording of the user's screen, and the red lines moving across are their mouse, like cursor moving, and the little red dots are actual mouse clicks. And this one's really cool because you can actually watch them sort of as they go page to page through your application. So you can see them come into your app, they use this page for a little bit, they go to the next page, they use it for a little bit, and you can see their whole user journey from start to finish. And the really cool thing we've been able to do with this one is we've been able to actually, somebody's reported a bug, we're able to look at the recording of the user finding the bug and determine, they weren't using the product correctly, which means we need to add some help for them so that they don't run into this again. So that's a really cool one. But sort of the keystone, at least for me, of Hotjar is this one called incoming feedback. And this is sort of the dashboard of the incoming feedback. You have just a stream of, hopefully positive, but you have a whole stream of feedback from your users. And so if I hop back to, or actually this one's a bit better, the bottom left, there's that little green happy face. So people can see that and they'll click that and it lets them rate you on a sort of 1 to 5 scale and give a little message, and they can highlight a piece of your application and give specific targeted feedback. And so I took this picture last Sunday, and the thing I like about this is it lets you really get the pulse of your product. So we can see some people are having some issues with like accounts and connections. That can help us prioritize work for our next sprint where and sprint being, if you're not familiar with that, just our next sort of 2 weeks. It can help us plan, maybe we need to investigate this. Maybe we need to get out ahead of this before real big, issues come up. So to sort of give the counter to this page, which is, things are sort of hunky-dory here, but this one is from when we were sort of in the middle of converting our design. So we were going from our existing design to more of a responsive material design, hashtag buzzwords, but you can see a lot of red, a lot of orange, a lot of gray, and those are colors you don't want to see on this page because that means either neutral down through negative. So, you can see it's really annoying when you change a system and you don't let your clients know, people aren't happy. And it's hard to see that, especially in our situation where we see it as a challenge that we don't actually directly deal with businesses very often. We always deal through our partners and through our salespeople who deal with partners and businesses. And so this is one of the key ways that we've been able to gather more feedback from users and make changes. And sometimes there's such a thing as too much feedback. This person, stop annoying pop-ups asking me to rate it while I'm trying to work. Sorry. I mean, there's only so much we can do, but we need to get your feedback. I mean, that was valuable. I think we ended up, this one was from sort of mid-November, and it was shortly after this that we added sort of our own little hack to hide that little feedback button when somebody had given feedback, because otherwise, and especially on your phone, if you're picturing, you have your phone, 10% of it is taken up by this little icon that once you've given us feedback really isn't actionable. So it is annoying. I mean, I agree. So calling all the way back to this message from Jackie, our Chief Strategy Officer, talking about Hotjar. This is the piece of feedback that somebody left us. Probably can't read it, but they had, they definitely mentioned interesting content. They wanted that back really badly. But they also had some other suggestions. And this is stuff that we wouldn't have been able to get as concisely or as directly if we hadn't had this, this feature from Hotjar that let us gather this. If somebody complains about this to their salesperson, then the salesperson, maybe the way they work is they sort of gather, business complaints for a week and then let us know, or, worse, longer than that or whatever. We might not hear about this, and certainly not as concisely as we heard about it via this form. So, all that to say, what are some takeaways that you guys can take, and gals, can take, and hopefully work into your own applications and your own workflow? First, get to know your product better than anyone else, especially if you're a new developer on a new team. Use your product. If it's like you're talking about industrial machinery, fine. But if it's about pretty much anything else, use your product as much as you can. Just really dig into it, because having a really good understanding of your product and its features is what enables these kind of deep conversations you can have with users and people who use your product every day. Because if you don't, you feel like an outsider to them, and they don't want to tell you about their problems because you can't empathize with that. Find people who will tell you the truth about your product, but beware that there is such a thing as unproductive feedback. If somebody uses your product in maybe the way it wasn't meant to be, they might have suggestions for you that, they're what we would call the 1% case. So you could implement this feature, spend a week of developer time, and you end up with this thing that 1% of your users use, and you basically wasted your time. So if you have people like this, make sure that they sort of suit your use case and your normal user use case. If you can, gather feedback directly from your users. Hotjar is a great way to do this, but in person is the best way, because there's all that nonverbal communication. You don't see their eyebrows raise at a feature when you're reading the Hotjar incoming feedback. And finally, engage with your users as often as you can and work your hardest to delight them, because at the end of the day, if you're writing software, hopefully that's what you're trying to do, is give the people that use your software, whether it's internal or external, you're trying to give them the best experience that you can. And that's sort of why we do what we do. So that's all I had for you guys today. Thanks for listening. And I'd love to talk to any of you about this afterward, but enjoy the rest of Ideas on Tap. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Graham. I think we're going to take a 10-minute break now before our next speaker. And so grab some snacks, grab a drink, bathroom break. We'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker will be beginning in 3 minutes. 3 minutes to the next speaker.
All right, everyone. Can I get your attention, please? We're going to continue with the program here. Our next speaker should require no introduction to Saskatoon tech circles, but I'm going to give him a brief one anyway. Albert is one of the partners at Zoo and is one of the most creative minds in the local tech scene, and I'm really excited to see what he has to share with us today. So everyone, please give a round of applause to Albert.
Can you guys hear me? All right. Hey guys, long time listener, little first time caller. I've actually never been to an Ideas on Tap in my life, which is really strange. No offense, guys, but I've been to a bar camp here. I remember when you guys started. We used to actually play Vendasta in parking lot hockey when there's only like 7 guys. And if Alan is in here, we were like trash talking for about days to see who could be a better hockey team. And I remember we had a few hockey players and it was really good. And I remember we were practicing every single day, and then finally Brendan comes out with his team, and we're like, oh man, we're going to get killed because Brendan looks like a tank. And so does Alan. And I remember as soon as Alan came out, he was running out, and then he looked at his stick and was like, oh, I think I'm left-handed. And I was like, oh, we're going to kill these guys. We killed them like 10-0, and it was like pretty funny. And we had to switch teams because we felt bad. Anyways, I've done a lot of talks, and this is the first time I've ever done something with like this Tony Robbins headset. So I feel like this is like, if there's a chance to take a photo, this is it right here, right now. Anyways, so my name is Albert, and I work at a company called Zoo. It's just down the street, and I always say we never compete on the project. We always compete on just people. That's the funny thing between Vendasta and us, and we have a mutual respect of definitely watching you guys grow up and really being jealous of how awesome you guys have grown, and really just watching you guys from a distance. But definitely had some people come from Zoo to go to Vendasta, Vendasta to Zoo, and learning a lot about the processes and what you guys are doing. And today I'm just going to just talk about our practice a little bit and how design thinking fits into this practice. And I don't know, I wrote social services case study because I think I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So we'll see if this is actually going to even click. Oh no. Oh yeah, there we go. So, hi, we're Zoo. Just in case you guys don't know us, we're a digital agency or design strategy firm. We're really kind of graduating our brand from being these guys. Uh-oh, I think I have to like get really close. Oh, there you go. Being in like a company like this, which is, you know, started in 1995, and it was like what you thought would a small website company be. And this was just on 2nd Avenue, I think. But we've kind of grown since then to be, you know, downtown, close to the cop shop, and into that old A&B Sound building. And we're about 30 to 35 people, depending on some full-time and part-time staff. We're primarily designers, developers. I am none of them, which kind of, I always say it's funny that I'm a piece of furniture in this tech scene, because I'm actually just a business grad who worked in a company for 15 years and can label myself some sort of tech strategist. But these are the people who do all the real work, which are the designers, the developers, and the accounts people and project managers who kind of make us tick. But the office is kind of neat. We also have like our own like creative space, which is kind of in our experience lab, where we run workshops and really teach organizations around Saskatchewan and even Canada how to use design thinking and human-centered design. So it's really good that Graham was kind of up here first to talk first about how you guys do it. And you have to understand where we come from is a different world. We're consultancy, so we have to go into these companies, legacy companies, governments, municipalities, multinational organizations, and try to talk about how you guys build software and try to implement this into some sort of old heritage kind of system where we're working with IT, marketing management, people who don't really understand a lot of the technology, and multiple departments. So again, watching you guys build software internally, I get really jealous because it's amazing how much attention you guys can put to one like comment field or one way to favorite something and take out that feature because you can test it. For us, sometimes we get one crack at it. And this is why you see software for governments kind of suck. You get to see it and you use it and you go, oh man, like how can we not make this better? It's because sometimes even with the building and working with the cities, they're like, our mandate is to be good but not great. But you never have that in Silicon Valley. You have to be great. The experiences has to be mint. But in, if you guys are using the city website and it's way too slick, you're like, no shit, they got to be filling potholes with that money and not building like some like amazing like JavaScript slider or something. But the world that we're moving from is websites and graphical design to this entire kind of ecosystem of digital, which is this, and it's changing, and companies have really a small understanding of what's about to come. We're looking at IoT, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and this is not science fiction anymore. This is stuff that's happening all the time, and I'm sure you guys in research and maybe in development are trying to implement these new technologies. You're lucky because in the organizational world of people who aren't building software, they're not using this sort of stuff. So what I want to talk about is just kind of our general approach, because again, we could compete with like organizations that are IT consultants now. We don't really compete with the advertising agencies. We're building software and complicated user experiences for organizations that are starting to realize digital is a thing. It's not just a website that you build and you walk away from. And because of that, we've started looking at things like design thinking and human-centered design. And so these are just typical ways that we work with clients. And we use the term design thinking loosely, and it's hashtag buzzword today, but for us, design thinking is a really simple term. It's just a practical approach to finding a creative solution to problems inspired by traditional design methods that you don't have to be a designer to understand. And that's important because we're always working with executives, marketing people, IT, and we're bringing them to facilitate a day, and that we're going to teach them how to actually think from the customer's point of view. Because so many organizations today say things like, oh, customer's number one. Whatever they do, whatever they want, we'll give it to them. But that's bullshit. We know that. We sit on the phone lines for 30 minutes, and then a recording comes on and says, your call is very important to us. Please stay on the line. And we're like, what human-centric design firm designed that? At least have some empathy that I'm sitting here frustrated waiting for my flight to change. So I like design thinking to just say that it's just an approach from problem solving. So we're not necessarily always building a digital platform. You can definitely use these methodologies to actually find a solution and some flow for some interfaces. But a lot of times we are just bringing together two different departments to understand what their problems are. So it's a lot of like coaching and facilitating at that point. The way we look at design thinking in the industry, it's very confusing. If you think about we're the designers of the world, we couldn't come up with a more complicated way to explain the world of design. We use different terms like design thinking, human-centered design, UX, IX, design sprints, which is the Google's way of doing design thinking in like a week, or customer experiences. You always hear about these terms. But for us, it's just design. We're not designing graphics. We're designing systems. We're designing services. We're designing products. And you guys too. You guys are designing products. The process for us is really simple, and this can take months. It can take a week. It can take, a year. For us, we really like to empathize at the beginning. And so Graham was talking about talking to users. Simplest way to empathize with users, to define who they are and talk to them. And there's so many different research methodologies to be able to talk to them. You can do interviews, observations, diarizing, giving them like a phone to basically input everything they're doing over the week. Or you can actually do focus groups, surveys, questionnaires. From there, we like to define the problem. And talking about defining the problem, we use things like how might we statements, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. From there, once you actually realize what the actual problem is, then we can start ideating and going big and coming up with different ideas. And this is where like the Google Design Sprint, if you guys are using any of that, that's ideation. It's trying to figure out how many different ideas can we do to solve this one problem. And from there, you try to prototype it. And again, this is not news to an organization like you, because you're just constantly working in this iterative kind of agile way where you're prototyping as you go. And finally, bringing it to test. And this is what Graham was saying. Just test it, talk to people, get that human interaction, get that feeling back and that emotion, and then start doing it over and over again. It should actually be a circle. How many of you guys have heard of this book, The Design Sprint? Okay. It's actually a pretty cool book, and it's designed by somebody in Google. It's written by Jake Knapp, which is this guy right here. Oh, actually, they always say it's just in 5 days, but now they're saying it's no. Like, you can do this in 3 to 1 half a day. There's so many different parts of the design sprint that you could use. But it's written by Jake Knapp, and we were in San Francisco speaking at his conference about the design sprint because we've been applying it and ripping it apart and putting it to our purposes. And guy like Jake Knapp comes up and really inspires people. I'm going to rip off a story about like how he wrote the book and why he wrote the book. He said in 2001 he was working at a company called Encarta. How many people have heard of Encarta? It's the old CD-ROM encyclopedia. He was a graphic designer on it. And he said the first thing that they were doing was designing the interface and the browsers and all the systems and the design system. And he was just a junior designer just out of school. And he said that in 2001, all of a sudden this thing started popping up on the internet called Wikipedia. And his team was always just like, real cute. It's good for them to try to do this little encyclopedia thing that's public domain. Because Encarta was owned by Microsoft, and it was this big engine. And so they were the rock stars in the organization creating a DVD-ROM or CD-ROM encyclopedia. And so he had these epic battles of designing these amazing new browser interfaces on how you can look for information rather than alphabetical. And he showed a bunch of different examples of how he came up with this idea. And he thought it was the main reason for the sales pitch. And then when it actually came to market, it was just in the very top right corner. It said new browser format, but it was all about like, you know, the price and everything. And eventually he said that it was all driven by marketing and no technology, and there was no design, and they were all in different silos. And that's what he was kind of noticing, why everything was kind of falling apart. He said that whole project was doomed to fail, obviously, because we know that we don't even have CD-ROM drives on our computers anymore. And then he said the real gut punch when they got replaced was that when you actually Google Encarta, it's actually on, it's actually on, what? Oh, maybe my slide's screwing up. Anyways, it's actually a Wikipedia entry of Encarta, and it says, oh, are you overriding my slides? There you go. Yeah, there you go. It says, Encarta was a digital multimedia encyclopedia. And he was like, oh, just to know that they won that war. But eventually he went on to Google, and he went on to help and kind of essentially invent Google Hangouts, which is kind of his thing. But he did it with such a way that he was able to shrink the development time or even the ideation time down to a week. And he used that using a Google Design Sprint. And it's basically a 5-day method to, to map out the entire process, to sketch out the ideas, to prototype the idea, to test it, and then do it over again. And it's now being used by all the Google venture organizations. They have a Google Sprint Academy in Google, and Jake Knapp is now like this local celebrity within Google, or he doesn't even work there anymore. So that's something that you guys can definitely look into, is doing some design sprints. And the thing about the design sprints, you don't actually have to follow the book. And the first thing that they said when we were at the conference is like, the book is kind of already out of date. There's parts of the book that you can take and use for your own self. And that's exactly what we're looking at, because we can't just say, hey, 15 people from social services, stop what you're doing, come over to our lab for 5 straight days and come up with this prototype that's just eventually just going to be a sketch. Big organizations can do that, and governments seem to have a harder time actually taking that step. But what I'm going to talk through is just this exercise we did with social services, which we're actually starting to apply a lot more to some of these projects that we're doing. And with social services, a lot of people don't understand that. I can tell we're probably not on income assistance, but if you've actually been on income assistance in the past, it was actually pretty sad. You're waiting about 46 minutes on the phone just to reach a person who can start applying. And you can't apply online. You can't even mail something in. If you walk up to the actual social services desk downtown to apply for income assistance, they say, there's a computer or there's a phone over there. Please go use it. We're just here to kind of dole out the checks. So you got to imagine like the problem, the social issues that they have. And if the government actually released the numbers for how many people actually got service through the phone lines, it's pretty abysmal, and you would have a big public outlash because the system just can't handle the amount of calls that they're getting. So they knew that was a big problem, and they said, we need to actually start doing this project that we did 13 years ago, but we're too scared to do it because they're building off this 1972 system, and they can't change that. So they said, what can we do at the smallest level to be able to change and bring the phones down? And the biggest thing that they said was, well, look, can we just put this as a PDF online? And coming from the human-centered design practice, that's not good enough. If you think about low income, low access, low education, low English, this is something that the operator script looks like. And I wouldn't even want to fill this out. And then this is another form. This is another form that they have, which is also really pathetic. And we can't just put this up. This is not what the government should be doing. So we told them, okay, in order to do this, it's going to seem like a lot more work than you initially assumed, because we're not just going to take these forms. So what we said, human-centered design, understand who your users are. And they were like, well, it's people on income assistance. We're like, no, let's make some personas. Let's truly understand who these people are. So we actually had to go through exercises, go through some data to understand what programs can we actually affect, who is most likely to use an online system, and create some real fictitious personas that everybody in the organization can kind of like latch onto and truly understand these are the people we're fighting for. And from there, the ideal thing would be, obviously, to go talk to them. But because of the government system and the privacy concerns, we can't just go out and talk to people who are in income assistance. So what we ended up doing was listening to hours and hours of phone calls. So it's a lot of ethnography, just understanding who these people are, what problems they're at, social status, and understanding the kind of vulnerability they have and the things that they don't want to answer on the phone, and really understanding and getting everybody in the groups to see what insights are we getting from these phone calls. That was the best we could do at the very beginning for some of the research. And from there, we actually employed some 2-day design sprints methodologies where we had to like sit, we asked for about 15 different people who were on the front lines, working on the phones, people who were managers, supervisors, people who had good understanding who the users were. And they took people, a huge swath of the entire organization, and put about 15 of them in the room. And I didn't know at the time, but they were going to make a smaller crack team. And this is like a tryout of who was most engaged and who come up with the best ideas. And so we ran a bunch of Google Design Sprint methodologies. We did Crazy Eights, and we actually got them to storyboard what their ideas were, and did a lot of like sticky noting, and ended up getting a lot of different answers. Oh, what is going on? There we go. This is just trigger happy. I'll go to the next slide. Right there. Oh, I want that one. I want. Are we like playing this weird dance? Okay, go to the next one. There you go. It's time for a new computer. So we did these things like how might we statements, and this is just an example of how might we statements. And I don't know, do you guys ever use how might we statements in your practice at all? So how might we statements are part of the human design centered kind of design world. IDEO is the one who kind of came up with the idea, and it's about asking the right question. And the reason I like how might we questions is to solve and to present to a group of people that are going to solve a problem, is because it asks the question in such a unique way. Let's see if this will work. Uh-oh. I I forget, maybe New York, for this conference, and I ended up sitting beside this guy who's a pickup artist. He actually made CDs to pick up women, and he was sitting right beside me, and he's like, hey, you're like kind of a digital guy. Why don't you listen to my CDs and tell me exactly what my website could do to help me promote myself better? And I was like, okay. And he's like, but in return, I'll give you all my tips. I'll give you all my files. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great deal. And I thought I didn't need it, but man, his stuff was actually pretty entertaining. It's enlightening, you know, so it's like a self-help book. It's like, even though you're cynical about it, you listen and you're like, okay, that actually is pretty good. But one of his tips, I think it was like track 4 on his CD, was about asking the right question. And that's so important when you're talking about solving a question. Because if I said, what's your idea to solve this problem? People would come up with massive ideas. It's as similar to thinking, he said, if you're asking a girl, you want her to feel in a certain way and you want to pique the interest. And he says, if you say, what are you taking in school? He said, you're going to get those generic answers, math, English, and the person's not going to feel any passion. But he said, if you do it like this, you're going to get such a different set of answers. And I thought about that in the way of how might we questions. It's about how you word a question that actually piques people's creativity. And this is what we do constantly at work. And if you practice these how might we statements, it's funny when we work with clients and then all of a sudden you're at the at lunch or something, they'll notice a problem at lunch. And I remember we were with this client out in Ontario, and we started doing how might we statements, and then we were in line, and there's like the retirement line at the casino for the buffet, and then they were taking forever. And everybody in line was like, how might we speed up the regular time for people to go through who have quick lunch breaks versus seniors? You know, if you ask a question like that, you might come up with a bunch of different answers rather than just saying, how might you fix this problem? So how might we statements are something definitely, again, all Googleable stuff. This ain't rocket science. So for social services, we came up with them throughout a full morning and figured out how might we help users self-identify for what program they should apply for. So we took that and put it on the wall and said, you guys try to solve this problem. Or how might we gather the minimum required information to determine the program stream? Because the one problem, again, with, you know, when you're trying to get people to log in or fill out forms is like, how much information do you actually need before you can push them to the next stage? And that's like a little kind of fine balance. And we have to figure out how much they were okay with doing because we didn't want to scare people away. But the government is notorious for asking for way too much information. So we were trying to minimize that time. And again, so we got people to draw out what they thought was ideas. And again, I said we compete with the IBMs, the CGIs of the world. And so we see these business analysts kind of doing their focus groups of what do you think the software needs to do? And people just write it down. And then there's your functional set of requirements. That's kind of the old way of designing software in these kind of legacy kind of worlds. But for us, we're essentially doing business analyst work, trying to boil down functional requirements this way, more visually, so people can understand fully what you're actually talking about. And, oh, I feel sorry for this lady. We're stuck on her. Okay, and so, yeah, we get to these sketches, and these little dots are the kind of heat maps. So you get people to vote on what they like for their best ideas. We always have to have a decider in the room, so you have to assign one person to be the decider, and they get the big yellow dots, and they're maybe the project sponsor or the person who knows the case the best. So yeah, again, storyboarding, or else you'll taking one panel, really drawing it out. And then for a designer and for a solutions team, we'll take that back and look and go, oh, okay, they're thinking of something like this. Everybody seemed to like really focus on this. From there, we're able to kind of write out better functional requirements or take it to like the next stage of wireframing. But again, a project like this, you still have to understand the back-end system. So we constantly always try to map out systems, and that SWIN system is literally the 1972 system. So they had to layer on something on top of it, like a big CRM. That's another story though. And understanding the user flow of like when, you know, we could only solve this right here. We can't really solve any of this because of the whole system's too old, and the scheduling software would have been a big nightmare to do. And they said that would have been 8 years because you'd have to do the scheduling software for the entire government. So there's certain things we could only do, but the whole goal was to, you know, reduce the phone calls. From there, we said, okay, we have some big ideas, but at the same time, we need to break down this form. And we weren't going to do another Google design sprint because the one problem with the Google design sprint is everybody here who designs and works on software, we're in that kind of demographic that can easily design and understand what an interface looks like. What we're noticing is that when you bring this into just a random office, some people just don't know what navigation is. They don't even know what like a feature would be. They have no idea what like a pull down menu would be designed. So sometimes you do waste a little time. So what we thought is, why don't we break down the process and we can do the sketching right in front of them. So what we did, and this is something we just made up on the spot, was we wanted to role play every single question. And we had 3 people who were phone attendants, and I just pretended to be somebody who was actually on income assistance applying. And the first question I'd be like, hello, and they'd be like, hello, what's your name? And the other person would go, whoa, I don't ask that first. I go like, do you have your social insurance number? And they're like arguing. And I'm like, this is exactly why we're doing this, because there's not a single way that everybody does this. So we're ending up going through every single question. This actually folded out probably 3 times as long. And it was every single question, every little sticky note, every little white card was any sort of gotcha or any sort of unique situation that we had to flag. When we did that, we then took a stab at just an initial set. And this is where you can't be scared to start sketching, because it's going to be wrong and you have to accept it's going to be wrong. And so we just took initial stab, and then after 2 hours they came back and said, oh, okay, now I see what you guys are doing. Okay, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. We got to move this to here, this to here. We're like, perfect. That's the feedback we want as a big group. Let's go to the next stage. The next stage is another stage of the entire drawing, getting closer and closer and closer. And then finally, we're able to start drawing even more high fidelity screens. This is in the span of 2 days. This is not like weeks or months, but you know, back in the day, this would have taken months to go back and forth because you're hurrying up and you're waiting with clients. And eventually, we get to screens like this. We get to about, this is just to break down one set in one program, is this many screens of how many questions. And the thing was, we weren't trying to prove that you have to ask one question at a time. We just wanted to simplify it so that when we actually got to that question, we could be very clear and concise. But sometimes we did amalgamate some of the questions. So then you ended up getting to sketches like this. And when you can just sketch something saying that it's 15 minutes or 33 minutes over the phone, this is good because the IT person or the back-end developer is going, oh, okay, you want this, so I'm going to have to patch this into our data system for the phone. And we're asking, can you even do that? He's like, yeah, no, that should be good. And that's just a sketch, and that solves that problem. He understands exactly what we're trying to use it for. And eventually you get that, and it turns into this screen. And then you get this, and it turns into, like, you know, this screen. And we had so many of these screens, and we had so many iterations, and we ended up taking these screens, and to test it, we brought it to the social services office, and we weren't able to be there, but the government was able to test it. And they ended up taking people who were applying and just said, hey, do you want to just use this system really quickly and just test it out? And because you're testing it, we're just going to expedite your system. So you can't actually pay them with a lot of money, because then it's taxable and it turns into this big complicated system. So we had to just find a little reward system, which is actually getting them through the system quicker. And so we did this, and we found a lot of different things, like people who were Indian, like East Indian, were checking off status Indian. And those are things that are like really good information to know. So we had to figure out how to word it properly, because on the form it says constitutional status. Nobody knows what that means. So then they try to like get it even easier, but then how do you figure out Indian status? Like, do you have to show a map eventually? Because it's low English, and it doesn't, we like tossed around that idea. And eventually you have to get to the weak battery. Yeah, just the mobile screen. And just to show from a government perspective that this is what it is. This is what feedback is. You have to have like affordance and mental models, and you have to feed forward and feedback in your designs. And we were showing them that this would just kind of have a little bit of an animation there. The story ends kind of in a sad way, is because, you know, this is a cautionary tale. In the consulting world, you're not always just contracted to design and then build it. Sometimes you're just designing it. And they had their contract partner of another framework that was third party that wasn't very strong to try to leverage that. And they're going to take this, and as much as we try to fight for it, they were adamant that they could figure that out. They're like, oh yeah, we can front-end program because everything is so easy on the front end, right? Until they launched it, and it kind of went off the rails. I can't really badmouth it because we weren't a part of it, but at the same time, it was just kind of like, yeah, that's what happens in some of these projects, and you can only go so far with it. So that's kind of the whole point of design thinking, is getting to doing sketches, prototypes, and not being afraid to try things out. And in organizations like this, you have the runway to be able to do it. Bigger organizations find doing like this. This is doing stuff like this is like for summer camp, and it's crafts. And sometimes you don't get a lot of buy-in. And the higher you can talk to CEOs and executives to kind of convince them, they'll actually buy into it. But sometimes we get brought in at a low level, and then somebody will walk in and be like, "What the hell are you guys doing? What are we paying you for?" Because we're like getting paid like a consultant rate, and we're getting people to kind of walk around with phones and pretend that they're clicking on certain things. They don't really understand that that's how it's just done nowadays. And so you don't even have to prototype, that high fidelity. You can actually just use sketches, and I hope you guys are definitely using sketches because that's just obviously the easiest way. But you can even prototype an experience and understand, hey, this is like the height of how it should be, and nobody wants to be this low, or you got to accommodate for somebody who's shorter. That's all about the way we like to prototype things, and leave you on just the fact that we're moving into this unprecedented time, that human experience is now like a thing, and people don't really understand how important that is going to be for the change of the future. Zoo eventually might not be a company that has graphic designers, and that's just the reality we're in. We might all just be voice. Eventually, if you wanted to know the share price for Cameco, you would just yell it out into the ether, and somebody will give you an answer. And we have to figure out, from an experience design standpoint, are we equipped to design for that? And that's, I think, why we're kind of repositioning our company is to being more design strategists, and not saying it's graphics, it's not user interface anymore, because we're moving into this new era that I think you guys are just going to be a part of, and it's really exciting. And I think that the energy that's in a building like this is something that needs to be felt across the province, because I feel like I go into these companies all the time and just bang in my head going, what's going on, you guys? Are we not looking at Blockbuster? Are we not looking at Sears and seeing what the hell just happened? I have a slide on another slide deck that shows like a board of directors of this senior management of what a typical board looks like. And I just said, if this is your board, I would be scared shitless. You guys are going to be held back unless these people are forward thinking. So my encouragement to all you guys is just to keep fighting, and to make sure that this stuff doesn't sit on the back burner. This isn't sci-fi. This isn't something for the video game world. This is going to happen, and it's going to just change. And I think Saskatchewan has a chance to fall behind unless companies like us keep pushing. Anyways, that's maybe 20 minutes or longer, but hopefully I motivated you guys or brought you down for the weekend. But if you guys have questions, let me know. All right. If not.
All right, thanks, Albert. Do we have any questions for Albert? We do have a little catch box. Anyone? Nope, no takers. All right, well, if you do have questions for Albert, he'll be around for a while. We're going to take another quick break, get your final fill on snacks and drinks before our final speaker.
if it's on the left side of your body. Front or back, doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Just goes on straight like that.
Is that good?
Okay, and our clicker's up there, right?
Great presentation, Albert.
Yeah, good. I don't know.
Am I on here? All right, everyone. Can I get your attention, please? We're going to get our last speaker up here. So our final speaker of the evening is Adam Stahalik. He's from Cantina. which I'm guessing most of you folks haven't heard of before because they're not really a Saskatoon business. But Adam's going to give us some more detail on what that's all about, and I'm really excited to see what he has in store for us. So please, everyone, welcome Adam.
Green light. There we go. Hey, everyone. So great to be here. It's my first time at an Ideas on Tap at Vendasta. I think I've been at a bar camp before. Had a great time. So thanks for having me. I'm Adam. I'm from Cantina. We're not in Saskatoon. We're a Boston-based design and development agency. So we are, most of the team is in Boston. We get a lot of fair number of remote people. I'm one of them. And long story how I got here. I'm not going to go into it now, but there's beer. I'll tell you over a beer. We do user experience design, service design, customer experience, as well as front-end, back-end development, mobile development, and more and more work these days with connected products. So that's kind of the theme of what we're going to talk about today. Validating connected device design through hardware prototyping. It's a lot of words, but I'm just going to run through some hardware prototyping we did on a client project that we have underway for the past 2 years that really helped us kind of accelerate our understanding of the product, the data we're getting off this particular device, and help us inform decisions we made around the mobile experience as we built that out. So I got to figure this thing out. Talking about connected devices, the Internet of Things, what is it? I'm guessing with the audience here, a lot of you are familiar with this term, you know what this means, but just a quick recap. I'm sure you're familiar with all these products up here. Basically, we're talking about devices with network connectivity, with sensors, with control systems, and with digital experience wrapped around it. And this class of devices is really challenging our notion of digital design as we build products to interact with these things. So some of these devices like the Nest there, the Apple Watch, the interface is built in. Other devices, you're crafting companion experiences to go along with it. And there are certain challenges with that. And we'll go into some of those here in a bit. So, IoT, what are the design challenges there? These are just some of them. There's obviously many design challenges, but, is the user going to know what to do with this device when they pick it up and they take it out of the box? It's a big question a lot of people struggle with. How do I turn it on? Where's the button? How do I know it's on? Is the user, if they buy it or if they're gifted it, are they going to understand the value that this product gives them? They may have gotten a new thing to automate their home and they've never really integrated anything like that before, and what are they going to do with it? How reliable is the device's internet connection? A lot of these devices are really low power, relying on either Wi-Fi, cellular, or some Bluetooth connection. Is the boss calling me? Just gotta kill that. What do you do with a less than reliable internet connection? So these are a lot of different design challenges that you need to think about when you're building a digital experience around a connected device, because the failure modes tend to be common use cases now. You're not dealing with what if the user's internet goes down on their PC, the browser doesn't work, well, they're just not using the internet. That's pretty straightforward. But you have a device that's sometimes online, sometimes offline. How do we deal with that? So there's a lot of challenges here. I'm going to focus more on the last couple here is, IoT devices are often collections of sensors. So, look at the Apple Watch, you got heart rate on there. You look at the Nest, you got temperature. In some cases, those sensors are giving you data that's well understood, both by you, the designer, and the user. They understand the ambient temperature in your home. That's a no-brainer. But in other cases, the sensor data may not be the most obvious thing that you're trying to present to the user. You may be interpreting data from multiple sensors and synthesizing that in a way that's going to make sense to the user. So I'm going to look at some examples of how we tried to deal with that on a real-world project we had at Cantina. And the last point I want to talk about is when you're dealing with a project that involves digital design and building user experience around a connected hardware product, your software design cycle isn't necessarily aligned with the hardware. So they could be on very different timelines, and you may have a spec around what this product's going to do, what kind of data it's going to give you, and you may not ever see that data for 6 months later than when you're building a feature around it. You try to mitigate that as much as you can, integrating with all these different other vendors or other teams in the organization that you're working with who are building hardware. But at the end of the day, you may not get that hardware for quite some time. So what do we do about that? So yeah, that's really what we're looking at. How do we start to begin to test our designs, validate the approach, see if it makes sense to users before we get that real final, ready for manufacturing kind of hardware, which goes through a very diligent process, designing a complex circuitry for going to Chinese manufacturing that's going to be waterproof and possibly wearable and run on low power. That's a big undertaking. And we're building a digital experience around that. So we might need some of that information sooner than we can get it from the final hardware. So one of the approaches that we take with this is in-house, just doing our own hardware prototyping. So we are, by our history, a digital design and development agency, and for most of our 10 years, we never touched hardware other than the mouse or the trackpad. So what getting into this area allows us to do is start to look at different aspects of what the hardware is going to give us in the end state and start to build the interactions around that so we can test, so we can validate how we think the user is going to interact with this. And the great thing is, we've got the maker movement now. We've got, really low cost electronics components that you can, order online. And there's a lot of great names up here. Is anybody working at any of the maker spaces in town or doing any of this kind of design yet? I've seen there's a couple of maker spaces here in Saskatoon. I haven't personally been to them yet. We've been kind of building this in-house at the office, but really encourage you to check this out. So there's a lot of names up there. Many might be familiar to some of you, but Raspberry Pi is a great way to prototype hardware. For this particular use case, we used a lot of Arduino components or Arduino ecosystem components made by Adafruit. So they've got a lot of great things. You can get barometric air pressure sensors, accelerometers, GPS, whatever you need to sort of simulate what you're going to have in this connected device at the end state, which may be on a circuit board that's that big. But you can breadboard this, you can tie it all together even without circuit boards, get something going so you can have something for your app to connect to while you're doing development. So the case study I'm going to talk about today is a product from a spin-off of the American Kennel Club down in the States, and it's called the Link Smart Collar. Has anybody heard of this product at all? Awesome. There's at least one. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what this does. So we've got the collar there. It's basically an electronics tracking unit. It sits in a leather collar, and it's packed with radios and a few sensors. So this is there to ultimately improve your relationship as a pet owner with your pet. So this helps you find your dog when it's lost. It helps you understand if the dog's in a harsh environment due to temperature sensing. It helps you track the fitness levels of your dog. You know, whether or not you do it for yourself, that's up to you, but it lets you track, you know, if your dog is hitting their fitness goals and what they need. It's a thing. It's a thing. So there's, you know, there's, in terms of technology, there's GPS, there's Wi-Fi, there's Bluetooth, there's AT&T 3G cellular data connectivity, all in that little puck. So there's a lot of technology going on in there. It's a pretty complex build, and it took a lot of smart people a lot of time to get it to that point. But from our perspective at Cantina, we were responsible for the app experience. And you know, the timeline for that product to come to maturity wasn't exactly going to meet our needs for testing some of the features we had to build. So I'll give you a quick look at the apps. These probably aren't the most recent incarnations of it. On the left side, you've got sort of your map view where you can, you know, if your dog is lost or if you're just voyeuristic about what your dog's doing right now, you can bring that up, see where the dog walker is or isn't taking your dog, you know, in real time. And then on the right-hand side, we've got, you know, the classic activity circle for tracking your progress against your pet's fitness goal. And hopefully, by nature of getting your pet more fit, you're getting more fit in the process. So Ella met her daily goal that day, and that's the dog, that's not the owner. So the particular issue that we were looking to address that was one of the bigger unknowns when we started the project is the activity tracking. So if you know Fitbit or Apple Watch style activity tracking, you know that it's measuring steps, it's measuring, you know, the energy you're putting out with your body to some degree. So the collar comes equipped with you know, a Fitbit-like accelerometer. So it's, you know, your standard 3-axis accelerometer that's measuring movement on the dog. But you know, at the point we're getting into this, we really didn't have any reference data to pull from. We didn't know what kind of readings we're going to get off this device eventually when, you know, the hardware, the first version of the hardware was really getting closer to being ready. And nobody really knew what that was going to look like coming off a dog. You know, could we measure stride and cadence? You know, how is the dog's breed and weight and age going to affect all that data? Could we distinguish it in the data that we got off the collar? And, you know, more importantly, you know, once you put a sensor on a, you know, not quite wild animal, but a perhaps very busy animal, what's that going to look like in the real world? Are we going to have any sort of reliable way to get all that off of there? So that was our challenge. And the approach we took with that was a pretty low-cost, low-effort prototype that we worked on with just off-the-shelf components. So this was, you can see a couple pictures of it there. We've got a little 3D printed case that had a little bit of curve in it to go around the dog's neck. Wasn't really made for comfort, just to, you know, get something hanging around a dog's neck, because that's ultimately where the dog collar was going to sit. And we had these Adafruit components. So I'll show you those in a bit, but there's a controller board there, accelerometer that we spec'd out to be as close as possible to the final hardware, just so we were getting reasonably similar data to what the final product, as best as we knew from the specs, was going to give us. And, you know, not getting too fancy. We're not doing any wireless connectivity. We're just writing it to an SD card. You know, timestamp data to an SD card that lets us, you know, capture the movement of the animal. And so after that, built a couple of those. We, again, use these really cheap off-the-shelf components. You can get pretty high-quality components from Adafruit. They're a great provider. And this will support the Arduino environment, which is a programming environment for, you know, encoding applications onto, on the right-hand side, there's a microcontroller chip. So you can build small applications to run on that, to integrate sensor data, save it off to an SD card or pump it out over a Wi-Fi radio or Bluetooth or whatever you need to do. So those are just a few of the pieces there, but overall the bill of materials on this was about $50, and we were able to build a couple of them in about 2 days, and that got us ready for the next phase of this design effort that we're doing, which is sorry, I jumped ahead. I just wanted to show, I know maybe not everyone in the room is a coder, but when you look at what the Arduino environment can give you, this was the main run loop for the whole application, just to capture the accelerometer data. It's pretty straightforward. We're just reading the raw accelerometer values. We've read the raw values and then the dimension values, so we get like the meters per second squared as well as the plain old sensor values, and just threw that out to a CSV file on the SD card so we can grab all that later. So there's not much more to the quote-unquote firmware running on the controller than what you see there. Pretty straightforward. And speaking with the actual hardware developers, this was roughly going to approximate what they were going to get in the finished product. They're obviously going to do a lot more pre-processing of the data and batching up of the data, but this came close to it and close enough for our needs. So we've got this great little test unit. We've got some microcontroller code to run on it. So what do we do with it? This is where I've got more dog pictures. I hope that's okay. We put it on some dogs. We had some people on the team who were tied into some of the pet owner communities in the local areas around Boston, and they organized a day out at the dog parks where we got some pet owners that were pretty focused on training their animals over particular movements, and we were able to test on a variety of breeds, different shapes and sizes of dogs, and capture data along with recorded video. And this basically gave us data that we couldn't find anywhere else. So starting the project, we had all these assumptions around what we were going to see from this, but this really let us just throw the sensor on some dogs and get an understanding of what was coming out of that. So it was a really fun day. I wasn't there. I wish I was. I think they had a blast. So what do we learn from this? There's only so much I can go into being a client project, but in terms of the animal mechanics of the dogs we tested, but there was some pretty important things that we got out of this that actually helped scope the rest of the project. We had some assumptions up front around the kind of vital signs of the dog with weight, height, and weight, age, and breed as being important to the process of setting goals. And to some degree it was, but it allowed us to scale back on a lot of that. And we probably would have over-designed some of these features without having gone through this exercise. And certainly if we had waited for the final hardware to come through and start give us this data, we would probably be months behind where we needed to be to build out the UI and be on time for product release. I think another really important thing that we get out of this is, we were really working in parallel. Hardware team, the back-end team, and the mobile app team, they were all working pretty much in parallel, and our interdependencies were often, not managed as well as they could have been. Hardware would get ahead of us, or back end would get ahead of us, or we'd get ahead of the back end. And what this allowed us to do is just to start capturing this data and start flowing it through the system. So the back end, they didn't know what they were even going to need to do to model this data. This gave us a really good sample set to help them start to build their data models and start to build out the database, the APIs, everything that they were going to need to really support this feature. It let us start to push sample data into the UI, building out animations, testing with users, understand, do you get it? Do you know what we mean by high activity, medium activity, and when you set a goal for your pet, how do you achieve that goal? And was that even feasible with the data that we were getting off the device? So these things really helped us accelerate the timeline in a way that was independent of the other hardware team that was really building out the finished product, which may sound obvious now, but at the time we were pretty dependent upon that hardware, and this was just one way we could kind of break free from their timeline and plow forward without being blocked. It's important to note that it may seem you could build this so quickly, that's great, but it's a long way from the finished product. There's requirements around temperature, around FCC certification, around waterproofing, and low power requirements that we had none of those constraints building this prototype. So we could just rip something out in a couple days, gather the data we needed, and then literally throw it away. If you go back to these dogs, you'll see there's the blue case there, but on all of them there's a whole pile of electrical tape around that thing because it pretty much fell apart the minute that we got it on the dogs' necks. It wasn't made to survive a day in the life of a dog. It was just there to get the data we needed and hopefully not disintegrate by the end of the day. When you see the actual hardware and mechanical design they worked on, they torture tested that thing. They, shot it with bullets, nailed nails into it, and basically did everything a dog could do to it. And then, of course, the dog does far worse. Yeah, gun-wielding dogs. So, without those constraints, we're able to get something together really quickly and put it in a museum somewhere when we're done with it. So, that's pretty much what I have today. I just wanted to leave you with some resources. Adafruit, if you're at all interested in this, they've got a lot of great resources because there's a lot of aspects to get into it, and sometimes it can seem daunting. It's electrical engineering, it's coding, but they have a lot of really easy access tutorials and educational resources to get into it that don't require as much expertise in this area as you'd think. And again, there's some maker spaces here in town. I'm itching to get out to some of them. I haven't yet, but I think they're maybe more on the mechanical design side than the electronics side, but based on their websites, it seems like they're moving into that space because this is a popular thing to be doing right now. So I think that's it for me. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you very much, Adam, and to all the rest of our speakers tonight. We have one final bit of housekeeping, which is our 50-50 draw. Are we ready to roll with that, or are we going to take a quick break and then do the draw? We good? Do we have any last-minute ticket buyers? Yeah, let's do this draw. All right, so we got $60. The lucky winner will be ticket number 0117940. Anyone? One more time. 0117940. They're gone. Next ticket is 0117903. Looks like we have a winner. Congratulations. So that brings us to a conclusion. Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up tonight. Especially thank you to our speakers. I really enjoyed all the talks tonight. Everyone, we'll still be around for a little bit for drinks and food. Please drive safe. If you've had too many drinks, don't drink and drive.